We went into this session not really knowing what to expect with the new majority in charge of the House. Now we have a Republican-controlled House, Republican-controlled Senate, Republican-controlled governor's mansion. And so we didn't know how things were going to flow. But I will tell you, it did not disappoint in the first week. And you probably have looked at the legislation that they actually got accomplished through the legislature in that first week. Many things that our organization has supported for several years, including the repeal of Kentucky's prevailing wage law, which is something that we had ardently advocated for probably over the last decade plus. It's always been on our legislative agenda, and we were thankful for them working with us, and including city and county governments and other local governmental units besides just school boards. Also, right to work is something that our board of directors have voted to support in the past, and the passage of that legislation, including some pension transparency measures and other bills that we supported, they got to the governor's desk in a matter of 5 working days, which was pretty impressive work in that organizational session. So all good stuff for cities flowed through that first week. We didn't know how many bills would pass when they came back, whether that was the show, whether the first week would be it, or whether there would be a lot of work done. Again, the legislature, both the Senate and the House, to be commended because they didn't waste a lot of time. Usually about 11% of the bills, that's the average, that are introduced actually make it to the governor's desk. We had 793 bills introduced this year, 190 of them passed it. 24% of the bills that were introduced actually made it in some form or another to the governor's office. KLC Board of Directors voted to support 101 of those 793 bills, and we do consider them all, don't we, Mayor? We go through, and the Board of Directors makes a determination on the legislation. 36%, rather than 24, 36% of the KLC supported bills passed. 8 of our legislative agenda items made it through. KLC took a vote to oppose only 16 of those 793 bills. And guess what percentage of those passed? I'm proud of this record still, 0%. So no KLC opposed measure actually made it to the governor's desk. Some legislation that I would suggest that you all take a look at, that you're going to want to be familiar with. I'll try to hit the highlights of those bills. We've advocated for several sessions to fix the anti-spiking provisions that were in Senate Bill 2, the retirement reforms that were passed in Senate Bill 2 in 2013. Finally, we were able to get past Senator McDaniel's Senate Bill 104. If you all have not received an invoice from the retirement systems yet on having to pay the actuarial difference on an employee who retired because of an artificial spike in their pension, if you haven't received that, you may not appreciate just how good this bill is, because we had a number of cities throughout the Commonwealth who were receiving bills for $20,000, $30,000 here, $15,000 here, their invoices on retirees, in some cases, that had retired 20 years ago. So the workings of, that was the one bad thing I think about Senate Bill 2 that passed. The language just wasn't thought through. What this legislation will do was eliminate these invoices coming to both cities, counties, school boards, state government. No more spiking invoices. But in return, it addresses abusive spiking, where there's collusion between an employer and an employee to spike salary at the end or towards the end of the work life to get an enhanced pension benefit. It does what every other state's done to curb those abuses, which is prohibit the employee from getting an enhanced pension benefit in an abusive situation. It exempts FMLA leave, it exempts workers' compensation leave, it exempts grant overtime or declared emergencies, so the employee's not unfairly penalized. But the taxpayer who was paying for these bills, you all ultimately, as elected city officials, aren't penalized when there's abuse because of that legislation. So the governor signed it. It'll become applicable July 1st. There's actually a 6-month period where there's no spiking invoices generated. If somebody retires between July 1st and January 1st, nothing happens. But then on January 1, if any retiree after January 1, the employee, if there's an artificial spike in the last 5 fiscal years of employment, which would be any increase in credible compensation exceeding 10% over and above the credible compensation received in the immediately preceding fiscal year, it would reduce their benefit. We had several alcohol bills passed. KLC and KCO worked with the state ABC on those. We had 2 or 3 pieces of legislation just to tidy up the alcohol laws and the licensing requirement. House Bill 100, the bourbon bill, we were very supportive of that. I think our cities have now embraced the fact that bourbon draws tourism, bourbon tourism in Kentucky. We were very supportive of that. We had several provisions in the cleanup bill that clarified the relationship between city and county regulators, from allowing cities to elect whether or not to have bars operate and counties to have bars operate within their jurisdiction. And then Representative Imes back there finally passed legislation that had been discussed over the past decade about fixing the election laws related to wet-dry elections. I'll probably let Shelley talk a little bit more about that one. We had several bills high on our priority related to drug abuse in Kentucky. I know every community, there's not an exemption to this. Every community struggling with that issue. House Bill 33 finally regulates and penalizes trafficking in fentanyl, carafentanyl, fentanyl derivatives. House Bill 158 makes sure Kentucky's scheduling of narcotics and other drugs comports with what's being done at the federal government level, automatically updates the scheduling. We're a little slower sometimes. Senator Carroll from down here passed Senate Bill 32, which requires the Administrative Office of the Court to share data on drug convictions into Casper. So prescribing physicians will be able to access that information when they're charting a course of care for a particular patient to see what their history is. And Senate Bill 120, criminal justice reform, I think embraces a first step of what I would describe as a different view of those that have struggled with addiction in Kentucky. And you know, we've been heavy on penalizing those that may have possession or that may have usage issues, or addicts that aren't traffickers, that aren't the criminals. I think it starts a shift to recognizing that you've got to rehabilitate, you've got to give a path to redemption in that. Several programs impacting local county jails are in there, prison industries. Most important, you all want your human resources people to take a look at what you're able to do in terms of considering people's past criminal records in hiring them for positions. Obviously, we have statutory positions in our cities and counties that say you can't hire a felon, but it may not apply to the assistant deputy city clerk. So it's an effective ban the box piece of legislation for local governments in terms of, unless the statute or state law requires that as a condition of employment, looks at the criminal record, you're not allowed to on the application process scan people out or shift people out based solely on their prior criminal background. Now, you can consider that in the interview process, you can consider that going forward, but it can't be the sole reason for denying employment. So some of your HR practices are going to have to change to comport with Senate Bill 120. House Bill 38, we were active in supporting that legislation. At first, we wondered why it was there. As a parent of a 10-year-old and a 2-year-old, I had falsely assumed that convicted sex offenders could not be on public playgrounds. That just applied to school playgrounds. it did not apply to a city-owned or county-owned playground. They can be there, they can be present. So House Bill 38 forbids convicted sex offenders, not only convicted sex offenders on the registry, but anybody from another state who would be required to register in this state, prohibits them from being on those public playgrounds unless the city or county or the owner of the public playground enacts or acts to grant permission to that individual. And that comes through action of the local legislative body. So two things we asked for in that bill with the permission is, one, it would have to be at a public meeting. So when you consider giving permission, it wouldn't be just an employee down in the Parks Department who could grant permission. It would be in an open meeting. It would have to take an official act of the legislative body to do that. For us, from a city perspective, that provides immunity because it's a discretionary act rather than a ministerial act. So if something did happen on the permission or granting of permission, the city would be shielded from liability. Stephen Rudy from down in this part of the state helped us with House Bill 337. He ensured that we get the same treatment on hiring away trained police candidates that come to my hometown of Richmond for now, I guess it's 25 weeks. Are we up to 25 weeks or whatever, 23 weeks that we're at? That if an agency hires away a newly trained police officer, that they reimburse the agency that paid for the officer during the training the full cost if it happens during that first 3 years, not a pro rata portion anymore. That's the way the state police did it. Representative Rudy wanted to put us on even par, sheriff's offices and city police departments with the state police. You all know, Mayor Rochetti Cantrell definitely knows Richard Heath's work and very important work on House Bill 338. For your technology part, TIF, down here, Senator Carroll, finally, Senate Bill 11, got the nuclear moratorium lifted. House Bill 119 is a bill you want to take a look at if you're in the solid waste business. It requires a notification process, not a compensation process, if you displace private waste haulers through taking franchise agreements or take over solid waste collection. Rather than having to pay for that, this provides a statutory notice process which would avoid legal takings cases. In addition, it also gives cities a little bit more of a voice by requiring the solid waste planning advisory committees to include representatives for cities on there in an advisory capacity in the development of the county solid waste plan. And also, if a county in their solid waste plan is going to enter into a franchise agreement that covers, with a hauler that covers city boundaries, if you can't already do your own, City of Paducah, I think, may be the only one down here that can do their own solid waste plan, that the city also be a part of that franchise negotiation. House Bill 318, if you're dealing with, and I know in Western Kentucky there's a real interest in dilapidated and abandoned properties. Michael Meredith, the new chair of the House Local Government Committee, passed legislation that clarified that you can send citations via first-class mail instead of having to post them on the notice. So we cleaned up the code enforcement statutes with that. If you're really worried about getting your Christmas packages, House Bill 404 passed, which allows UPS and other parcel delivery agents to use golf carts inside of cities and county governments. They have to, before they can deliver their packages using golf carts, they have to provide the local government notice 60 days prior to doing it. It's a city and county both. And you can enact an ordinance to keep them from doing it if you don't want golf cart delivery of your parcels inside your city limits. House Bill 72 is zoning appeals provision. Ensures that a lot of these frivolous lawsuits don't go forward. You probably want to take a look at that. I leave House Bill 189 to Mr. Link. Senate Bill 8 passed, prohibiting the use of any state or local funds. Typically we kind of oppose any preemption legislation, but our board took a different tack. Senate Bill 8 prohibits the use of any local taxpayer funds, in addition to state funds, to any facility that provides abortion services at all. Senate Bill 75, when you all get ready to run for re-election, now you can tell your family members that they can give you $2,000 per election rather than just the $1,000 contribution limit. We raised the contribution limits. That's going to cost a lot of us a lot more money. But it also made other various changes to the campaign finance laws that you want to take a look at. Despite all of these things, we left a lot on the board, which is not atypical of a short session at all. You don't have a lot of time, but you know, we've talked about road funding. We've talked about separating CERS, which is the meeting Shelley and I just left. It seems like we just left 4 hours ago in Frankfurt at KCO, where we met with Senator Bowen about pushing forward the CERS separation issue. We've talked about local tax reform. Those types of things didn't get addressed. It seemed like the standard answers from the legislators and the governor's office was to push those issues off until the special session. And so that's what we're doing now. And I'm happy to talk about all these bills that passed and give you all these summaries, but we are already shifted into the mode of meeting with the governor's office, other stakeholders, about how to prepare for what seems to be an almost certain call to special session sometime this fall to deal with pension reform. And that is going to be that is the most serious issue being discussed that could impact your all's bottom lines right now. If some of the ideas that have been floated out of the governor's office and some of the ideas that have been floated off this newly constituted retirement systems board come to fruition, you can expect a dramatic increase in your employer contribution rates for your employees. In fact, some of the stuff that's being talked about would nearly double the contribution rates if they make some of these changes. So we are being very vigilant with regard to seeking out separating CERS. It's in a much different situation than the Kentucky Employees Retirement System. Separate that out. Let you all govern CERS. At the end of the day, the red ink is showing up on your all's balance statements, financial statements, not the states. And so we should have some governance. We control, as city, counties, and school boards with classified employees, 73% of the assets in the Kentucky retirement systems. Yet we have 6 members on a 17-member board. 6 members, 0 of them serving on the investment committee. The state is not focusing on what the impact is of changes on local government's budgets, on local government's operations with regard to the pension system. You all paid your bills. You met the ARC. That's why we're 61% funded overall. And that's why we don't need some of the same measures that they may be coming after KERS with. And we need to go forward with that separation. So you're going to hear that drumbeat from both, I'm going to speak for you too, from both KLC and KCO getting louder and louder and louder as we approach special session. I hope that we can enter into the session with this separation bill as part of the governor's call for the special session. But if not, then I guess cities, counties, school boards, police, firefighters, cafeteria workers, school bus drivers, and others will probably be in a position to oppose any pension proposal coming out of the governor's office short of inclusion of this bill. In addition, there's a lot of talk about tax reform, and scarily, there's a lot of talk about local government tax reform. Usually, Shelley and I are saying, include local. You can't talk about tax reform without locals. But some of the ideas about centralized collection, having the state collect local taxes in Frankfurt. How many of you want to send your local revenues to Frankfurt? How many of you think you're going to get, when you send $1 to Frankfurt, you're going to get $1 back? It just doesn't happen. So those types of things we're probably going to be combating. with a proposal on tax reform. There's a definite idea about looking at the inventory tax. I think there's probably some room for discussion about how to replace that, that we're open to engage with the governor and legislators on. But we cannot put you all in worse financial situation with any deal that's being made on tax reform. Whether it's cutting the inventory tax or eliminating the inventory tax or having Frankfurt somehow think they can manage your dollar better on behalf of your local taxpayers. That in fact, I've always said, and John's been around a while, that I think if that passed, it'd be the one issue that I would probably get fired over, if they pass centralized collection of any local taxes. So be on guard. We're probably going to step that up and ask for your engagement with your legislators. Senator Carroll from down here co-sponsored it. Senator Humphreys co-sponsored it. What other senator comes into this area? Is that it?
That's it.
So we got both your senators co-sponsoring that bill. So we're in good shape. It didn't make it out of the Senate. The sponsor of the bill, Senator Bowen, decided to pull it back because the governor said he was going to veto it. And we thought strategically that was the best decision at the time, to wait, see if we could collaborate. But we were ready to go. We have about half the Republican caucus in the Senate as co-sponsors of that bill. It passed the committee 10-0, and that's where we just very clearly, I mean, I just not even mincing words, that's where we want to head with pension reform when we talk about pension reform.